Hi, and welcome to material for Chapter 1 for our Psych 200 course. So to begin, we're going to cover material for Introduction and Research Methods, which is our Chapter 1. But first I wanted to kind of explain a little bit about the purpose of these videos. So in this course, what the expectations are is that you'll read the chapter, and then I'm going to provide slides for you, PowerPoint slides that I would typically use in a classroom setting that will help to narrate and scaffold a little bit of the material for you. So show you what I deem is most important or provide any additional resources. These videos are a way for me to kind of go through my slides and to expand upon certain points or to provide more detail up front about that material. So the expectation would be that you would read the textbook, review the slides, which will be provided, as well as listen to the videos that I'm going to provide for you each week. And so that's what this video series will be for. So we're going to start the material for Chapter 1. This is not going to be a traditional lecture, so I'm not going to give you every point or every detail. Just going to really direct your attention towards certain areas in the book and expand upon certain things that I find to be most important. So to begin, the learning objectives will be in each PowerPoint slide. Be the first thing there. But typically we'll start with a definition. The definitions will help to orient you to what we're going to be talking about. The chapter in the Hockenberry and Hockenberry text starts with a lot of origins material about where psychology comes from. This is important material because it dictates where we went. We have to know where we were coming from to know where we're going. So very important information, but I've kind of highlighted it's more important that you understand it in a general sense rather than knowing specific dates and places and things like that. So the origins of psychology I've kind of highlighted for you in these slides. We also say that psych has a long past, short history, and that's because we can trace our past all the way back to Aristotle. But our actual history of psych, if you ask people, when did psych start, who was the first psychologist, we're talking about a relatively short history. So long past, short history. I also realized before starting here with our influencers that because I'm doing this screen capture tech, that we're going to be missing a little bit of each slideshow where my face is, but I'll be providing these slides to you, so don't worry if something is obscured by my talking face. All right, our influence of philosophy, you can read that information in the book about Aristotle, Descartes, also about the nature-nurture debates. This is very important in psychology. What dictates our behavior, our genetics or environment? And now we know that really it's both. We can't really separate them. Physiology, you can read about the influence of physiology. This comic is talking about Dr. Pavlov, so you might have heard of Pavlov's dogs. We'll talk more about that in the upcoming chapters, Chapter 5 for that. You can read about Wilhelm Wundt, who we consider to be our founder in psych. Read more about Titchener in your book, but I did want to mention a lot of people have difficulty understanding what he means by introspection. So what that might entail would be to look at something like this photograph and to try to really report your feelings and your thoughts while viewing this photograph. So what sensations, what feelings does this bring up for you? For us, it might be ew, or gross, or dangerous. And he would ask his clients to then report, or his subjects to report their feelings. William James is somebody you can read about, very, very important guy. He wrote one of our first textbooks in psychology. He also really helped us to see that you can go out and observe people. You don't have to only rely on what they'll tell you when they introspect. Go out and watch somebody and see what they do. Freud is someone who's interesting. A lot of people think Freud is the founder of psychology. Psychologists don't consider him to be our founder, but we know he was a very important guy. We know that if we've seen further, if we've learned more, if we've grown and developed as a field, it's by standing on the shoulders of those who came before. So we'll talk a lot about Freud in different parts of this class, but he's a very interesting, very controversial man, so you can read about him. Other founders are behaviorists. You can read about that. They really study the observable behavior only. Our humanists believe that you have a lot of potential for growth, that you're an amazing person as you are, and you just need maybe a little bit of help to get where you want to be. So those are our historical foundations. Each of those perspectives is something that psychology is built on. But now we're going to talk a little bit, or what you can read in the book is about these modern perspectives. So if you were to ask a psychologist today, where do you fall? What is your orientation? People would often be able to report, I'm a biological psychologist, or I come from a cognitive perspective. So read about these, make sure you understand these modern perspectives, because we'll build on them throughout the semester. The first one it'll go into is biological perspective, of which neuroscience is an important piece. And our neuroscience stuff we'll talk about in chapter 2, so we'll spend a good deal of time in neuroscience. The psychodynamic perspectives, building on Freud's work, you can read about that in the book, really focusing heavily on dreams and the unconscious. The behavioral perspective, this is again focusing on observable behavior only. So if I can't see it, if I'm just trying to tap into your motivation or something, that's not important. What's important is what I can view and actually see from the behavioral perspective. From the humanist perspective, we're talking about personal growth, about relationships, saying really that you're a great person as you are, and we're just going to build upon that. So you can read about humanism. Positive psych is one of our newest branches of psychology. And so psychology for a long time is focused on what's wrong with people, and positive psych is trying to give a different perspective and say what's right with people, or how can we help you be the best you can be. So you can read about positive psych. From our cognitive perspective, these individuals focus on mental processes, and they often use the computer as a model. Cross-cultural psych is also something relatively new, very interesting perspective. From the cross-cultural perspective, we've realized relatively recently in psychology, that most of our knowledge is based on weird people. So Western, educated, industrialized, rich, democratic, weird. And so cross-cultural psychologists really try to help us understand, is this finding central only in America? Is it hold only in America? Or it can go everywhere? Is this something all people do? And finally, our evolutionary perspective. This is taking principles based on evolution, often coming from finding a mate, reproduction, and applying those to what we see in psychology. The book will go over where you can find psychologists. I'm a developmental psychologist by training. 5% of psychologists are like me. And then finally, the book is going to go into a very important part of psychology, which is the research methods. So you can definitely spend some time reading about this in the book, but our goals of psych science are to describe, explain, predict, or control and influence. These get harder as we go through. So the easiest thing would be to describe something like bullying. Child A punched child B in the face. The hardest would be to actually control it or stop it. So these goals get more difficult as they go down. The information on theories and on the scientific method you can read in the textbook. Probably had a lot of exposure to that in the past. Where we're going to spend the rest of our time is talking about research strategies. So with our strategies, we're talking about two kind of categories. They're either descriptive strategies or experimental. With experimental strategies, those are the only ones where we can say cause and effect. The descriptive strategies we can't, but they also have a lot of important stuff to tell us, our descriptive strategies, and so we'll go through each of these briefly. You can read about the naturalistic observation in the book. For each of these methods, it'll give a little bit of information in the slides about what they are, and then ask you to really kind of spend a minute and consider what kind of problems we might face. So with our naturalistic observation, in this case, we observe behavior and we record it. So I might go to a busy street corner and watch people run red lights. I can't manipulate whether or not you're going to run a red light. It wouldn't be real behavior if I told you, you have to run this next red light. So it's not something I can really manipulate. I'm just going to watch and see if you choose to do it freely. Issues that might arise from this method, one big one is the Hawthorne effect, or what we refer to as the Hawthorne effect. So if you know somebody's watching you, you might change your behavior. I think that's pretty central for most of us. If I say, I'm going to see how productive you are, and I'm going to watch you build these objects, you're probably going to try and do better, faster, because you know you're being watched. So that's a problem. Case studies, you can read about this in the book, but really we look at someone who's experiencing something that's very unique or different that we don't often see and try to study them in detail. So this gentleman here is Phineas Gage. That railroad spike that he's posing with actually went through his head, went through his skull and back out the other side. He survived this. It's not very common to have that happen and to survive. So he was very interesting to us. Surveys, you've probably taken a billion surveys. If you go to Taco Bell, they'll ask you to take a survey on your burrito and its quality, so you've probably done this quite a bit. Easy and quick, but can obviously have some problems. Are people lying? The correlational studies, you want to spend a few minutes reading about correlational studies. This information is just a little bit more difficult, I think, to understand. What we're talking about with correlational studies are how strongly related two factors are to each other. So you've got something like IQ and shoe size. So we would think, how strongly related do you think your IQ is to the size of your feet? For most of us, we'd probably say, not very much. We'd be surprised to even consider making that association. They're probably not related. So in this case, we're probably talking about something that's not related, so the correlation would be 0. Not related, 0. If we're instead talking about things that were highly likely to be related, so maybe your height and your weight. So people who are very short often weigh less. People who are very tall often weigh more. Those might actually be related. So that's probably going to be closer to the absolute value of 1, to either -1 or 1. So that's our magnitude, is how big it is, 0 or -1 to 1. The direction is if it's negative or positive. If the direction is negative, that means the two factors go in opposite directions. So as one goes up, the other goes down. If it's positive, so just 1, not -1, just 1. If it's positive, they move either up together or down together. So positive correlation, up or down together, they move together. Negative correlation, they move in opposite directions. So definitely review that material in the text. It's also important to mention that correlation does not equal causation. So even if two things are related, it doesn't mean that one causes the other. The experimental method is our gold standard. So we love experiments. Woo! Experiments are amazing, but we can't always manipulate things we want to study. So we have to use other methods, our descriptive methods. But when it's possible to manipulate something, we want to look at a cause and effect relationship. We manipulate one variable, we call that the independent variable, or IV, and then we measure the second, so we call that the dependent variable, or DV. There are a lot of concerns with experiments, so definitely review that material. One of the big concerns is that lab experiments might be, or lab conditions might be somewhat fake. So you're in a lab, you know people are watching you, you might change your behavior. So something we do to look at this, or to kind of accommodate for this, might be to look at natural experiments. So with a natural experiment, we look at something that happened in the real world that we didn't actually manipulate or control, but we're going to kind of watch it and see what happens. So an example of this, which we'll come back to him, is David Reimers. That's a photograph of him and his twin there. And so he experienced, when he was a baby, a circumcision that was botched, ended up losing his penis, and they decided to raise him as a girl. And so that's a natural experiment. We would never go and cut off someone's penis and watch what happened, but it happened in the real world. So it's a natural experiment, and we watch and see what occurs. It didn't turn out very well, as you might imagine, unfortunately. The ethical guidelines, definitely review that in the textbook. We need to treat people fairly and with appropriate concern. And our last topic is pseudoscience. So read this information in the textbook. But with pseudoscience, we're talking about something that sounds like it's science, but it really doesn't adhere to that scientific method. So it's kind of mumbo jumbo. They say things like magnetic oil will cure rheumatism, woo, but there's no evidence. So we have to be wary of pseudoscience in psychology. Psychology is not a pseudoscience, and we don't want to give way to pseudoscientific thinking. There's a link in here you don't have to watch, but it's a pretty interesting expose there of Moisture-All, which is a fake product, and just kind of shows how infomercials can present some fake information. So this is the end of this video. We've gotten through all of our course content for or all of the lecture review for Chapter 1. Please read the book. Let me know of any questions you have, and thanks for joining us.